Well, Satyr, welcome.
Hey, everyone.
I'm so excited to actually be able to talk with you and chat with you. Been looking
Thank
forward to
you.
this. We've been trying to throw this together for like 6 months.
Yeah,
Just,
it's been
just
crazy.
about. Yeah. It's been really cool talking with you and chatting with you to try to build to get to this point. And now that we're finally here, it looks like we got a little bit of a turnout.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just watching all
Filtering
these
in.
icons showing up down on the screen here. Hi, everybody, and thank you, thank you, thank you, Badger, and thank you, Carl, for putting this together. I really appreciate it, and it's nice. Thank you, everybody who's here. I appreciate you being here as well.
We appreciate it just as much, if not more. Honestly, this is it's a great idea for an event that I'm glad it's turning out, and I'm ecstatic that we got to have like such a core member and author and just a piece of the World of Darkness, like a literal living member of World of Darkness history here, a couple decades in the making. But if we'll get into it, if you don't mind, I got
Sure.
a couple of questions I'd like to ask you.
Yeah, let's go.
So I really want to know where it all started with you. Like, when did you first discover tabletop gaming in general? Like before World of Darkness, like what game was it? How old were you? Like, who were you at that age?
Oh,
like,
wow.
what was going on in the world? Like,
I
take me
was
back.
I was 14. My parents had just split up. I was living with my dad. As I have since come to realize, though I didn't know it at the time, I'm on the autistic spectrum, and we didn't have that name or that designation for it back then. I was just weird. I was weird and I was shy and I didn't know how to interact with people, like hardly at all. Had a bunch of just really fucked up shit that I'm not going to go into because it's boring, and it was 45 years ago. But it was 1979. I was living with my dad in Springfield, Virginia, and I was really into models and monsters and stuff like that, and really not into dealing with people. And so I was just like walking around, the neighborhood, and there were a bunch of shopping malls. And I was, because I was really into military models and stuff like that, I was going to the hobby stores, and there were just these spinner racks of like little lead goblins and shit. And my dad was a big fantasy fan. Kind of, I remarked that my dad raised me on comic books and rock and roll and Playboy magazine and horror movies. And because he loved the Lord of the Rings, I read the Lord of the Rings. I didn't love it as much as he did, but I was familiar with it. And the Lord of the Rings, the Bakshi Lord of the Rings, was just coming out around that time too. And Wizards came out, and there were these miniatures, from the Lord of the Rings. And there were like Heritage and minifigs and Grenadier miniatures. And I was like, those are neat. And there were these little books of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, Dungeons and Dragons? What's that? And taking the book off the shelf and like standing there, go after school, walk over to the hobby store and go stand there, reading this book and going, I want to play this. And kind of my first reaction was to go home and write up like 10 pages of handwritten rules of how I would play with these miniatures if I had them. And then I asked for Dungeons and Dragons for Christmas, and so for Christmas 1979, I got the Monster Manual and the Blue Book and a bunch of the miniatures. And so me and my best friend Chris started playing it, and then we liked it, but we wanted to play with more people. So Chris got his friends Greg and other Chris, and we made a gaming group, and we were the only people we knew who played D&D until around 1984. Well, 83, because I graduated in 83. But then I went to college in 83. Got involved in medieval recreation in the meantime during that summer. And then I went to college in 1983, and I thought, I'm just gonna kind of outgrow this thing. And I was in school for theater. That's what my degree is, in theater. And I met Bill and John Bridges through a D&D group that Kathy LaCure, who was one of my classmates and friends there, Kathy LaCure and our friend Chris Hancock introduced me to Bill and John Bridges. Bill and John introduced us to the VCU Games Masters, which was formed in 1981 by Daniel Greenberg, who is Andrew Greenberg's older brother. And I really didn't like the system in D&D, but they introduced me to Champions, and I fucking loved Champions. And just kept gaming, through that, stopped playing. I personally stopped playing D&D in 84, but I kept playing Champions. And then one of the people in a gaming group that I formed with some other friends, including Jennifer Starling, kept going up until 1991. And one day, after Origins in 1991, Jen comes to our group and says, if you could be a vampire, would you want to be? And John and Lori Roby, who were part of our gaming group, they were like, oh, hell no. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds kind of cool. And Jen's like, because there's this game that just came out called Vampire, and would you guys like to play it? And John and Lori were like, no. And I'm like, I do. Well, Jen moved shortly afterward to San Francisco, and John and Lori moved shortly after that up to Northern Virginia. So I found another gaming group in late 91, early 92, who played Vampire. And
how did you find a gaming group in 1992? Because there's no Discord links. So what was it? What did that look like? So
that would be Judy McLaughlin and I encountered each other on a Richmond City bus, because this is in Richmond, Virginia. We met each other on a Richmond City bus, and we were geeking out over the buttons on our jackets.
Okay.
And she and I just started talking because we liked the buttons on each other's jackets, and she mentioned that she was a gamer. I was like, what do you play? And she's like, oh, we're playing this thing called Vampire. I'm like, you have a vampire group? I want to play. So that's we met on a bus, by the buttons on each other's jackets, like band. It was like band and some political statement buttons and stuff like that. So that's Judith McLaughlin, who became one of the mainstays on Mage. We met on a bus. So I got involved with her gaming group. And that was her, Libby Miller, who has also worked on Mage. And Judy's now super fucking ex-partner, Eric. And I'm just going to say to hell with him and to hell with everything he's had anything to do with. But we had that gaming group. So in the meantime, Bill gets involved because when White Wolf is coming together, one of the people involved with them is Daniel Greenberg, who is the guy who started VCU Games Masters. Dan gets invited to join White Wolf, works for them for a freelancer, but introduces them to his younger brother, Andrew. Andrew, of course, Andrew Greenberg, the first vampire developer. Because of all of our associations, he gets billed to start working on Vampire in late 91, early 92. Hunters Hunted, I think, was Bill's first. Bill joins the team in 1992, summer of 1992, on Werewolf. And when he tells me that he's got that job, I was like, cool. Well, by that point, I'd been writing professionally for 3 years. And I was like, well, professional writer, just, remember me when you're hiring people. So he did. And I started writing for Werewolf on Valkenburg Foundation. And the next year, 1993, my life was falling apart. I was in a nowhere job that I hated. I really wanted out. And I was like, I want the Mage developer position. So I applied for it and I got it.
It wasn't even that long between when you were first, when you first encountered World of Darkness to where you became a part of its production.
Less than 2 years. Actually, more than a year. Not even a year. Maybe a little over a year between the time that Jennifer said, "Would you want to be a vampire?" and the time I started writing for Werewolf. Yeah, on Werewolf, it was a little over a year. Man, time moved fast back then.
Oh, tell me about it. Yeah, I mean, I could only imagine. But so I got to ask then, what was your clan? Tell me about your first character. What did you play? Gangrel. Okay.
I'm a
Yeah, you remember?
weirdy beardy motherfucker, and I wanted to play a nature vampire.
Yeah. Do you have the same buttons on your jacket in the game?
No, actually, I don't even. I don't actually. No, I do still have that jacket. That jacket is still in my closet. Um,
Yeah.
but that's when on the cover of, I think it's the Masquerade Player's Guide, which we shot like 2 or 3 months. No, it would have been more than 2 or 3 months because it was winter. But a few months after I joined the group. Um, but I was the the gangrel on the Masquerade Player's Guide. Um, with not with the jacket that I'd been wearing because that was an army jacket, but I was all like, being feral and shit and freezing my ass off because it was like 20 degrees outside.
That's awesome. Gangrel. That makes. I guess I could see that. I can see it. So like, all right. So then, what was it that like, what was it that personally conceptualized your idea of magic and expression of belief and will, and what, how was it that you said this is how I want to approach magic, and as far as like when you start scaping Mage out, so it wasn't just I get X amount of spells a day and here's my mana points and stuff like that. Like how did, like you took a very unique approach. What was it that inspired that? Like kind of like what was your mindset? Was that something that just kind of came to you? Is that these ideas you were already experiencing and experimenting with at that point, and this was just a medium to express them? So how did Mage become, magical?
Largely Stuart. Stuart Wick, the original creator of Mage. He Stuart had said back when Vampire first came out, and he and Mark were kind of dividing up. Mark Reinhagen were dividing up territory on what games they wanted to do. Stuart said, "I want to do Mage," because he had the idea that mages should be people whose will and vision move the world forward, very much like Stuart himself, whose will and vision move the world forward. He was a fan of Robert Pirsig and his books, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and Lila, which are books about people who move the world forward. And that kind of Stuart's fascination for Robert Pirsig and Michael Moorcock and Neil Peterson, whose book Technopoly inspired the conflict dynamic in Mage of the technocracy concept, and the idea that human innovation would eventually lead to human stagnation or human deterioration through overuse. Kind of coincided very, very nicely with my fascination for Starhawk, the creator of the Spiral Dance. Joseph Campbell, obviously hero of 1,000 Faces, dude. Harlan Ellison, and Dead Kennedys. Because Stuart had very much the metaphysical, philosophical vision of moving the world forward, and I had the punk rock vision of flipping the table and saying "fuck you" to everybody, and that really those and Akira Kurosawa with the film Rashomon, and the idea that you can look at reality from several different perspectives, and the truth is somewhere in the middle, because nobody has the whole thing, and everybody's expressing their view of it, not necessarily what your view of it is, and all those things kind of came together. I've been fascinated with magic and metaphysics and religion and so forth since I was a kid. I was raised Catholic. I mean, I'm Sicilian, so naturally I was raised Catholic, but it didn't really connect with me. I mean, it was like I had this whole thing like I can sense that there's something going on here, but this kneeling in the church and saying this shit is not really connecting with me. And then when my parents split up, I had this whole weird spiritual experience. Because I went and spent some time with my dad's younger brother, who is an evangelical Christian. And I had a brief evangelical Christian phase. And then I rejected that because it was batshit crazy pants and everybody was lying. And at which point I was like, I can sense there's something here, but this is bullshit and this is bullshit. So I went and started getting really, really interested in different religions, Judaism, Islam, and so forth, and just going, to a certain point, there's like this bit of connection, and then they fuck it up. And finally, I had this kind of, I connected most deeply with modern, neo-paganism. And I still consider myself a pagan now, but it's not pagan in the Wiccan sense of, some, Edwardian dude who wants to get in girls' pants, but in the sense of connecting with divinity as expressed through nature. And I basically had a metaphysical experience where I was basically like, okay, God, goddess, great spirit, whatever the hell you are. Now I can sense that there's something here, but how do I find it? Because this religion thing is bullshit. And I almost literally heard the words in my head. That's because you are looking at the works of man. If you want to understand the ways of God, the ways of divinity, then look at the creations of God, not the creations of man. Well, fuck, that actually makes a lot of sense. And as a kid, I spent a lot of time in the woods. Like I said, I was shy, and I didn't really know how to interact with people, and I didn't really frequently like interacting with people because I didn't fucking understand them or what they wanted. What I wanted to do was spend a lot of time walking in the woods and playing in the woods and like, being with the trees and shit. That was something I understood better. I've always gotten along really well with animals. I love animals. And animals made a whole lot more sense to me than people do, and they still do. And the idea of perceiving divinity and experiencing divinity through animals and through nature made a whole lot more sense to me than kneeling in a church and saying shit that you didn't believe in. So anyway, all this stuff connected with what Stuart was going for. I never particularly liked, although I was fascinated by the idea of magic, I didn't like the way magic was presented in role-playing games because, like you said, it's all this spell does this many amounts of damage, and it was just glorified mathematical combat maneuvers. And that didn't connect with me at all. I am generally a very tactile, sensory, sensual person. And I experience things, I guess, again, partly because at least partly because of my autism, but I'm very hypersensitive to things. And so the sensory experience of magic connected with me a lot more than the mathematical combat maneuvers associated with magic. And what Stuart conceived of, and what Stuart, Travis Williams, and Andrew Greenberg put into game systems was that magic was an extension of the mage. Bang, that fucking did it. That was, okay, I'm in. I'm there.
So it was more about, it was almost this, I would imagine that had a lot to do with like how the idea of paradigm came about, and how your personal perspective is a lot of the filter, and it kind of puts a prism to shine the light that makes sense to you, which is a lot of like these underlying themes in Mage. So I'm sure that came with a lot of like catharsis and probably frustration as well, trying to like express this in your works and as your medium, to where you're trying to create something cohesive at the same time you're trying to write with your heart. So it's
and you're writing as fast as you literally as fast as you can, because like we were talking about before the show started, the schedule at that point was 8 to 10 books per year per line. So
that's crazy.
It was, and it drove us literally crazy. A lot of, it was fun, but it was also irrational. White Wolf was both really, really fun, and it was kind of the definition of a toxic work environment. And it broke a lot of us. That was our brand. Really and that was just it. Right. Yeah. It was.
You're the bad boys of gaming.
Bad boys and girls, but yeah.
Yeah. You guys came through. All of you just really came out of nowhere and just and took a completely different approach to what is, what is immersion based gaming, and grounding it something so close to, like anybody could be, some half elf Legolas-esque archer, or some wizard that speaks these spells off in this this fictional land. But to be, Bert the mechanic from Chicago that needs to feed every night, or sees the world from this enlightened stage that, it kind of just clicked with them through these, what would seem rather mundane, but somebody else is magical and just perspective changing. It seems like on the surface it would be easier, but you really got to sell it that much harder, because you don't have this gap of like this sort of just accepting the absurd for the sake of the premise, because your premise is so close to home that you have to really make it believable and really make it like hook really deep, because you're playing so much closer at the player's heartstrings.
Yeah. Well, and that's where my theater background came in. Because I was an actor for about 10 years. And actually these days I'm still kind of doing a little bit of it, but though not live. But I was trained as a method actor, and the idea with being the heart of the method is to bring emotional reality to artificial circumstances, and to have that emotional reality connect with the emotional reality of your audience. And so that's the way I approach writing. It's also how I approach gaming, and it's how, as a game designer, I approached taking this brilliant cerebral concept that Stuart had and getting people to want to play it. Because first edition Mage is a whole lot of really interesting ideas, but it's really hard to hold on to, partly because they also wrote it in about 2 weeks. But partly because it's just, Stuart had these great philosophical concepts about reality and paradigm and dynamism and stasis. And people had a hard time connecting with it. They're like, what do we do with this? And I was like, we make it personal. We make it about people. And we write it in such a way that people go, holy shit, that's me. And that's what made it work.
You guys crafted like a series of bumper points where you could really bounce around and take your own trajectory within it, but it gives you enough bouncing points to where it can be cohesive with people that took a completely different trajectory down the same alley. Yeah. And that's just something that you don't really see in a lot of other games, at least, especially not before then. It was just it was almost intimidating how open it is.
Yeah, like, it is intimidating.
Like I said, I got into World of Darkness, and by extension Mage, back in 2006, which is a little late to the game, but I dove right in, and I still haven't found the bottom. I've been falling for almost 20 years.
Dude, I've been doing it for 30 years. I haven't found the bottom.
yeah. For sure. Yeah. So I guess for having such a long career within Mage and going through all sorts of different fan bases and brand images and all these things, like, what are some of like your most notable challenges that you faced along the way, as far as like adapting or writer's block or anything where you just felt like you had a mountain in front of you, and how did you overcome it?
Oh boy, that's good question. I guess that for me personally, because I mean, obviously I can't speak for anybody else. One of the biggest challenges was just, holy shit, how do I do this? Because when I started at White Wolf, I hadn't used a computer, and I had a word processor, but the brother word processor that I'd been writing on at home, and the Mac Classics that we were using at the office were two very different beasts. And Bill helped me do that frequently with Bill, how do I do this thing? I don't know what I'm doing. Fuck, I just deleted like 10. I just deleted,
where the last 5 hours of my life go. Yeah.
I didn't know how to save files. I didn't know how to save as you went along. But I had the White Wolf way back then was you basically throw you in the deep end push you in the deep end, and if you can swim, then I guess you can stay. You know. And I threw my whole fucking life into the deep end in 1993, and I had no idea how it was going to turn out. I had no idea what I was doing, and most of us had no idea what we were doing either, because we were fucking making it up as we went along. Most of us, at age 27, I was 27 when I joined the team, and at age 27, I was the third oldest person in the company. The oldest person in the company was 30. The youngest was 17. Most of us were, in our early 20s, and we had, I wouldn't say we had no idea what we were doing, but we were making it up as we went along, all of it.
I think we said earlier, you didn't have a path. You just had a machete and a bunch of jungle in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a big part of it, was just figuring out what the fuck we were doing, how the fuck we were doing it, and how the fuck we could keep doing it. Because also, I was talking about this on the Mage Facebook group about 2 weeks ago. Somebody had asked about the Page XX thing, and why the editing on the books was so messy. And I was like, because we were literally putting them out as fast as we could. An editor would be lucky if they got more than a week with a book. And between the time that the book went to production and the time that it went to press, you might get 2, maybe 3, if you were really lucky and really stubborn and dug your heels in, proof passes between the time that it went to production and the time that the file went to press, and you might get 3 weeks, maybe, between that one point and the other. More often the books were laid out and went to press in a week. So because
you guys were putting out books faster than they could be read.
We had to, because that was the only way we could stay in business. Because although all of this stuff was selling at that point, and I mentioned this again on the Facebook group, but it was basically the role-playing game industry was like the comic was run like comic books. You put out the issue. Each book that you put out is this month's issue, and it would be on the stands until it sold out. And unless like it was like a core rule book, or the player's guide, or a player's guide to the Sabbat, where it's sold tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of copies, and it stayed in, justified staying in print, you got 1, maybe 2 print runs of a book. So we had to constantly put stuff out, because you got to pay the salaries. Most gaming companies outside of TSR, West End, FASA, and Steve Jackson were volunteer. Nobody got paid. It was a hobby.
So you guys were shotgunning content.
We were shotgunning content in order to stay in business.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, because that's the way like everything is now. It's what have you done for me this week? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like you could have an incredible video that does really good and garners a lot of like attention, but if you don't have another one right away, all of that momentum is quickly lost as quick as it comes. And that was like pre-internet driven commerce in a lot of ways too for you guys. So without even realizing it, you guys were kind of setting this new pace that literally everybody's doing now.
Well, and although this was pre social media, because social media didn't exist for over a decade. Social media as we know it now didn't exist for over a decade. But we had our phone number and our address in the books, and people would call us, and people would show up at the office door, and most of those people were really cool. Some of them were like, "What the fuck is this book? Why didn't you put out this book? I need this book right now because my game." Literally, we'd have people screaming at us, calling us on the phone and screaming at us. We would frequently put that on speakerphone, and he'd get Brad across the office. God, listen. We'd be like, "Oh God, you got to listen to this." Farm attorney, man, would you fuck up my farm, man? I'm not exaggerating. I'm seriously not exaggerating. Some people would do this. So we were getting the equivalent of hate rants, back before when the internet barely existed. So that
before
was part
it was
of
cool.
That was when there occasionally. People will be like, how do you deal with the hate that you get online? I'm like, we were getting hate online before most people even realized online existed. Plus, I came up in live theater and I played in rock bands. I'm used to having people throw beer bottles at me. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt when they hit you, but you just kind of like, yeah, this is
You deal with
you
it
accept
better.
that's the deal.
Yeah.
But
Well, kind of on that note, then,
yeah.
what would you say is you fucked up my thaumaturgy has got to be great. That might have to become a meme here. But what was your most like surprising or impactful feedback that you've gotten from fans over the years? Like, what are the moments you've had? Literally waves of different fan bases of different generations. But are there any particular interactions that stick out and stick with you as you go on?
Yeah. So, thank you again. Good question. So as we were talking about earlier, when I left White Wolf, I was pissed off, and there were people pissed off at me. I was pissed off at them, so I distanced myself. That's the name Satyros comes out of that period because I was distancing myself from my White Wolf work, and this would have been about 2005, I guess. I was hanging out with a friend of mine, and she introduced me to a friend of hers who had cerebral palsy, and we were hanging out for a while, and I asked him because of the like the ways in which he was having problems, like with his hands working, or just misfires in his limbs and so forth. And I was like, I hope I hope I don't know how to ask this question. How do you deal with that? That must be really, really hard. And he's like, well, I didn't want to fanboy over you or anything, but I learned to deal with it from Mage. I'm like, what? And he's like, you talked about he said, especially in the Cult of Ecstasy book, that showed me that it didn't matter what the world imposed on me, that I could remake my reality my way. I was like, I'm fucking like tearing up now, just like remembering that was fucking huge. Because for me, at that point in my life, basically, Mage and White Wolf were like a bad memory. There was a bunch of just toxic bitterness and stuff all surrounding that, and having Mike tell me that, I was just like, wow, thank you. That I mean, real.
It's got to be very gratifying to know that your work can move somebody, not just entertain them or help them escape for a while, but actually have an impact and have a lasting effect on them.
Yeah.
Because you never met this person, but they met you through your works, which is always, I'm sure, always blindsides you when you happen. But that's amazing. So I think that Mage tends to have that effect on like a lot of players, as far as at least in a lot of subtle degrees, in a lot of subtle ways. There's so many RPG fans that I know that now hold the bar of any Magic system out of another game to Mage, where they're just like, well, this is dumb because if I wanted to do it, I should just be able to blah 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 if I can A, B, and C. And it's almost just like they drank the Kool-Aid and they can't get out, So, but I mean, it's as far as Magic systems, it really is something that causes you to think a little bit more than just mechanically. You have to think a bit more abstractly, and you have to think with some empathy too. And you really have to like place yourself in a different mindset for it to even work in the first place. And that sort of demand isn't there in a lot of other games.
That's Stuart had wanted, like I said, Stuart's most brilliant of a lot of brilliant ideas Stuart had. Stuart's most brilliant idea with Mage was the idea that magic is an extension of the Mage. That the Mage does not use magic, the Mage is magic. And because that resonated a lot with me, and because by that point in my life I had real paranormal experiences and I was, involved in real metaphysical subcultures, I was like, so how do we make that happen? And in the meantime, Stuart's original idea with the magic system was essentially kind of just make it up. And Rob Hatch, justifiably, said that doesn't work. We can't sell that. It has to be more usable than that. And the combination of Andrew Greenberg, Travis Williams, I think Ken Cliff was part of it at that point because he was the Ars Magica developer at that point. But they came up with the idea of making it using the Ars Magica improvisational magic system to work with Mage. And Andrew and Travis, oh, puppy. Hello, puppy. That's a happy puppy. But Andrew and Travis came up with the sphere system, and didn't play test it, and it needed a lot of fixing, but I did the fixing. And one of the things that, as I was given pretty much total creative freedom with it, when I asked Ken Cliff, I said, what are my, what are kind of my limits here? What are my parameters here? And he says, as long as you don't change anything major within the first few books, do whatever you want. We don't have the slightest idea what to do with it. So basically, I pulled together a really good team. Brian Campbell, Sam Chupp, and Kathleen Ryan, who were already involved in Mage before I was. They were part of the writing of the first edition. Brian and I were also roommates, and later Kathy and I were roommates as well. And when the three of us were living together, we would just hash this shit out. Sometimes we'd be like talking about it till dawn about how to make these things work. Sam Chupp also lifetime pagan, real pagan. And as I mentioned earlier, Judy McLaughlin was also pagan. Judy McLaughlin is a pagan with a master's. I think she may even have a doctorate at this point in genetics. And Libby Miller, who actually does have a doctorate in genetics. We all would talk about this stuff, either physically, face to face, with Sam, Brian, Kathy, Bill, Bill Bridges, obviously with the degree in philosophy. Would talk about this stuff either in the office or at home. In the case of Judy and Libby, who still lived in Richmond, we talk about this over the phone. But gradually, we hashed out how belief shapes the magic that you cast, how you cast the magic, how you live the magic, really, literally how you live the magic. And so that's when we start bringing in the ideas of magic styles. Focus becomes not something that a mage waves around to make you think he's doing magic. Focus becomes the extension of how you live your magic. And it took me a while to hash all this stuff out, because again, we're making this shit up as we go along, 10 books a year. But by Sorcerer's Crusade, the pieces were starting to come together. Sorcerer's Crusade is, I think, probably the single best Mage book I've done, just because it was the one where all the pieces just clicked just the way I wanted them to click. And it was, ironically, came out right before I left the company. But while I was working on Sorcerer's Crusade, I came up with a refinement of focus to make Mage work better in a live action in a live action venue. But by that point, I was too angry with the company to actually tell anybody what it was. So I took that and used it in Deliria Fairy Tales for New Millennium, which is the game that I did in the company I formed after I left White Wolf. And that approach got a lot of praise when Deliria came out. So when I came back for Mage 20, rather, I took that the way that I figured it out, which was to break the idea of focus down from focus is an item you wave around into focus is the combination of belief, practice, paradigm, belief, practice, yeah, and instruments, tools. What you believe, how you put your belief into action, what you use to put your belief into action. Click, that made it all work. It only took 20 fucking years.
Yeah, right. Well, it sounds like you guys are kind of in a way like given written a creative blank check to really scape out a lot of these ideas. So how did you balance your creative vision with like expectations and feedback and industrial realities?
A lot of it was that I've from the time that I took on the job, till like right now is I I talk to the fans, I talk to our audience, and again that's my theater background, because I came up in live theater. Part of I believe part of art in general, but especially part of live performance is the art is what happens when the artist expresses and the audience responds. And that sweet spot in there is where that's where the magic happens. And so when you're performing live, you're a lot of times you're not looking into the audience unless you're specifically, doing a technique thing where you're drawing in the one individual or directing it at one individual, but there's a whole vibe to it. And there's really, as fucking hippie as a term as that is literally what it is you're riding the energy of the moment. And ideally a live performer is in touch with the energy of the moment. And at that point where the performer and the audience are reaching that gestalt, I guess, but riding that energy together, that's where the magic really happens. Part of the training and experience that goes into being a live performer involves with being able to reach out and find that moment and ideally at least ride it, if not control it. So that's what I do from a writing standpoint, is I am constantly in touch with the audience, because y'all are where the magic happens. Because I can type this shit, but if it doesn't touch you, then it's just typing. And so I do things like this. I talk to y'all, I read I read the posts, I respond, I answer questions, things like that. And at conventions, I talk to folks because I want to know where this is reaching you. I consider especially after talking to Mike, it stopped being a job and I started kind of taking Mage as a sacred trust. When I realized just how important some of what we were doing was to people and is to people, then I was just like, that's important. It's important to me to know what you need and what you want and how to inspire you. It's like we were talking about earlier before the town hall began. What I really want to do as an artist more than anything else is inspire people, because especially we've got this world just fucking tears us down and beats us down and sells us things, tries to get us to work for nothing, tries to get us to accept garbage. And I've been there. I'm still there. And one of the things that keeps me going as a person and as an artist is going, fuck it. It's flipping the table and helping other people flip it too. So that.
So it seems to be a lot of it's a constant conversation though. It's a conversation that never ends with your audience, because new members come in, they grow up, some fall off, they bring in new friends that have never heard it before. So how do you feel that the gaming community and its perception of narrative driven games has evolved since you started? And how's it changed from an artist's perspective? How have these conversations shifted, and how have you kept up with it?
I love what's going on in gaming. Well, I love most of what's going on in gaming. I don't love the toxic. I don't love the toxic the waves of toxicity washing between fans and creators. I don't like the toxic behavior of some creators. I don't like the toxic behavior of some fans. I hate that people take something that is potentially joyous and artistic and meaningful and just turn it into an opportunity to kick each other in the nuts. I hate that. But the rest of it, I love. I love that we have the technology for people to, put out their own games, put them up on itch, put them up on Drive-Thru RPG. I love that we have forums where we can talk to each other. I love that we have the ability for people to create the game that might appeal to or speak to 5 people, but they can still put it out. When we were doing this back in the 90s, the cost of doing offset printing and handling it through distribution and retail distribution was fucking enormous. The cost of producing even a small game book was upwards of $10,000, and it can go it can go into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so in order to produce a book back then, you had to have the money, or your company had to have the money, and you had to be able to justify spending that money by saying it will sell this many copies. And at this point, you're only getting between 20 and 40% of retail price when it's going through distribution. So that $10 book might bring you $3 back. And out of that, you've got to try and make back the costs of producing the book, and maybe hopefully, pay yourself, pay your people.
So it's just a huge overhead.
Yeah, and you had to come up in order to publish something every year. When the developers were putting together the schedule for the next year, we not only had to come up with neat books, we had to justify to the rest of the editing and developing department and justify to management why we thought this X book would sell this many copies. In other words, would make it worth producing, make it worth the cost of producing it. And we did have a couple, we did have our experiments. We did have things like Children of the Inquisition or Book of Nod. And obviously Book of Nod, sold like crazy. But we did have the opportunity, thankfully, because the White Wolf stuff sold so well, we were able to do a few things like Love Beyond Death or Chronicle of the Black Labyrinth, where we didn't know whether it would sell or not, but we thought it was worth doing. Or God, Charnel Houses of Europe or Wraith the Great War, where you're taking a fucking huge chance at that point of whether or not anybody would buy it. But I love that now somebody can say, I just want to do a game, and they can put it together and they can put it up on itch, or they can put it up on Drive-Thru RPG at pay what you want, and they can still produce the thing, and there will be people who can buy it. And you can go on your Facebook page or your TikTok or whatever and promote it. And so anybody who feels like they have something to say can say it. And anybody who says, that looks interesting, can buy it. And we don't have to deal with the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment and the overhead. And you don't need to sell it to the gatekeepers. And you don't need to get a publisher who's going to fucking own all the rights to what you create to maybe convince them, oh, will you please let me publish your game? Will you please publish my game idea? You can just publish it yourself. I love that, because the level of creativity in the gaming industry right now is unreal. There's stuff coming out now that wouldn't have even been conceivable even 10 years ago, much less 20 or 30 years ago. And I love that. I love seeing that. I love people being so inspired that they're creating their own stuff and just going, hey, I did this thing. Can you give me $1 for it? That is awesome.
Yeah, it kind of brings it right back to the heart of the game. Yeah,
yes.
It gives it its soul back in a way. By removing the barrier to entry. Mm-hmm. And it is kind of just exploding. It's impossible to keep up on everything, where before it was you were fiending for the next episode. So it's just completely different landscape now. But having experienced how this landscape has changed over the past 30 years, like, what advice would you give to aspiring writers and game designers who are just starting out in today's landscape?
Well, the first thing is, I used to teach game design at the Art Institute of Seattle. And what I always told my students was, we live in a world where there are billions, literally billions of media. And, if you want to, I am all in favor. I advocate for anybody who wants to create something, unless they're being a fucking Nazi about it. And, if they want to create a Nazi role-playing game, they can go do that over there perfectly off a cliff. But I'm all in favor of saying, if you want to do the thing, do the thing. But if you want to publish it, if you want to put it out there, ask yourself, in a world with billions and billions of media, why does somebody want to spend time and potentially money with mine? Tell the story you want to tell. Don't try and tell a variation on somebody else's story. Do the thing that is personal, because that, going back to what I was saying a little while ago with Mage, what made Mage stick for me, made it more than just a job for me, and that has made it stick for 30 years, is big philosophical concept, personal. Why does it matter to you? And that's the core, that's the soul, as you put it, which is, you put it beautifully. Why does it matter to you? Because if it matters to you, it's going to matter to other people. It might be 5 other people, it might be 50 or 500, but if it matters to you, if you speak your soul, like you said, then somebody else will go, hey, I get that. I get that. And you might not be able to run a company on it, but you can at least have the satisfaction knowing that you did it. That's the biggest piece of advice. The other one is to make sure that you are as close as possible producing up to professional standards. And by professional standards, I mean, spell check it. Make sure that people can read it. Make sure that people can understand what you're putting out there. Make sure that no matter what style of art you go for, that it's art that actually in speaks to your concept, and it engages. Another piece of advice that I always give people in working in any medium is keep your audience engaged. Once again, so that's the theater thing there. Keep the audience engaged.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been engaged for 3 decades, so I think you're hitting it there. Okay. But what would you say are some key elements for making a tabletop RPG like truly memorable and engaging? And like, what are some of those beats that just you have to hit? Like you touched on it a little bit with, making sure that it's legible, spell checked, read well, package. You don't just need a good product; you need a good package. You need a good box for it too. But what are some of the what are some of the essential, even if abstract, elements that every good tabletop RPG needs, regardless of its theme?
Somebody wants to. So it has to. Yeah, it has to have people want. Okay, when you are presenting people the role-playing situation, you're going, "You are this. Ain't it cool?" You got to have something that people are going to want to become. Whether it's they want to become it because they want to kill people, they want to kill their kill zombies, kill Nazis, kill, whatever, or it's because they want to act out the angst of teenage monsters, which is Monster Heart, which is one of my all-time favorite RPGs, and a perfect example of an indie concept done well. They want to kill their kill zombies. Could be, it could be that you want to act out the, or get people to become teenage outlaw, teenage girl gang members in a 1970s exploitation film, and that would be Velvet Glove. It could be that you want to make you're going to become a heist crew, a fantasy heist crew in a dark world, and that's Blades in the Dark. Whatever it is, you're inviting your audience. When you're designing a game, you're inviting an audience to become somebody. That somebody, whether they realize it or not, is an extension of themselves. But come up with a way to get people to go, yeah, I want to be that. I want to play that. I want to be in that world. I want to be that person. And this is a big thing that I learned being at White Wolf, especially. Be careful what you're asking them, or not. Be careful what you're inviting them to become, and how you're inviting them to become it, because that can blow up in everybody's face. Demon, vampire.
Hey! Don't come for my demon, man. Come on, let's leave them out of it.
But it's you got to be careful.
Yeah, for sure. But how do you navigate the complex or like sometimes critical landscapes of fandom, especially in like a long running series like World of Darkness?
Oh fuck, man! I'm still making that up. sometimes it's a lot. A lot of it is cultivating good relationships with people and not being a fucking douchebag. Part of it is just realizing, and I said this to Ed Hall, and it's become kind of my slogan over the last 25 years. Ed had taken over as Vampire. Ed was one of our writer and editors. He took over as as Wraith developer after Dansky moved on to Vampire Dark Ages, and people immediately started hating on him. He hadn't even finished. He hadn't even done anything, and people were going, "Oh, this is gonna suck now, man." Because by that point, we had, the internet hatred. Um, and Ed's going, "Why are they doing this? Why are they saying this shit about me? I haven't even done anything yet." And by that point, I said I'd been at White Wolf for like 4 years at that point, and had been in the performing arts for over a decade. And I was like, whenever you do something extraordinary, there are going to be people who worship you for doing it, and there are going to be people who throw shit at you for doing it because you did it and they didn't. And the trick to doing it long term is recognizing that it's not letting the people who worship you go to your head, and making sure that the people who criticize you and throw shit at you aren't right. After that, you do what you do because you're doing it and they're not. But it's the recognizing that a certain amount of shit is going to come your way.
Right. You got to get some resistance if you're going to push forward into anything, really.
You got to, at some point, you got to just say, well, there's another bad review. There are people who think they know me, who've never met me, who've never interacted with me, who've never spoken with me, but they'll write literal essays on the internet about what an awful person they think I am. And I just let that stuff slide off because they don't know me. They're projecting whatever it is they're projecting, and that just comes with the territory. I make sure that they're not right in the way that I conduct myself in my life, that I'm not, being this horrible person. And I'm always at that point, or to that point, I'm also looking to the creative or the helpful criticism, which is, hey, okay, hallmark example, the Akashic Brotherhood tradition book, which is the single worst thing I've ever been associated with. And the thing that got me to realize that no matter what the pressure was on us to produce those books, the books should not go out until you can do them right. But
would you say did that kind of temper that machine gunning sort of approach to putting out content? Yeah. And it kind of put like a personal degree of quality control?
Absolutely. Well, it's by the Akashic Brother. I mean, for starters, the Akashic Brotherhood I don't like using the word racist on it because that implies a certain intentional malice, but it's racist. It's a white suburban view of kung fu stuff, and it's created by white guys. It's created by white folks. It's created by suburban white kids, and it's meant well, but it's offensive. It's the same thing with Kindred of the East, which I worked on. We meant well, but you realize when you done fucked up, and you do better. Fortunately, thanks to social media, we can now find Asian writers to work with. You couldn't do that in 1993 or 94. But the Akashic Brotherhood tradition was a tradition book. The Akashic Brotherhood tradition itself was a bad idea. The Akashic Brotherhood tradition book, I had contracted two of my friends from college, one of whom was really into martial arts in real life and into kung fu movies, and one of whom is more into philosophy. The second one bailed on the first one. The first one wrote whatever he wrote because I was like, dude, I need the book. So he gave me the best thing he could come up with at the time, given the constraints. And I, at that point, was working on like 3 things for Werewolf. I was working on Wraith, and I was also, juggling 3 or 4 other Mage books. So I just basically did a polished pass over it. I'm like, I don't have time to read up and see whether or not this stuff is accurate. Fuck it. I just need to get it. It's already running late. Get it to editing. And
you're kind of just riffing on 90s tropes at that point.
Yeah. Well, which I mean, it was 1994, 95 at that point. So, that's what it was, the 90s. But in any case, it's a really, really offensive book. It's terrible. And it's terrible for reasons that aren't entirely the fault of the people who worked on it, but it is terrible. And we got a letter. I got a letter like 2 pages from I believe it was Chinese American. This is like 30 years ago, but a Chinese American fan who just fucking flayed us for doing it. And I was like, he's absolutely right. He is absolutely right. This book is offensive. This book is badly written. This book addresses all of the things poorly. We really shouldn't be putting out things like this. And I went to management and I'm like, I'm not going to put out another book until it's ready. And if we can't do it right, then we're not going to do it. And I made a lot of enemies doing that. And I drove myself literally crazy doing it because I put myself and the people that I work with under an intense amount of pressure. And I was late on a lot of stuff, and some of the stuff never came out. I mean, I came up with the idea of Dragons of the East, but then we didn't do it until they did it after I left because I couldn't find any Asian writers to work with on it. But I said, it's not going to go out under my name unless it's at least good. And there was at one point I got into an argument with one of the folks who was working on a later book, but he's going to hand it off to editing. I said, no, it's not going to editing. He says, I looked at it, it's good enough. I said, it's not good enough for Mage. Now, comments like that didn't make me any friends. And honestly, by that point, I was tactless enough that I was wrong.
That was just flipping over tables.
I was flipping over tables because that was all I could do. And I own the shit that I did. I own that I was difficult to work with. And I also owned that there were problems that we weren't addressing. So, they wanted me out. I wanted out. And, that was over 25 years ago. It's water under the bridge. We've all mended fences, obviously. But the point of all of that digression is the person who sent me that letter was absolutely right. And when you realize that you done fucked up, you realize I done fucked up and you do better next time.
So, yeah, okay. I think that's part of the journey, though, is especially like you said,
Yes.
when you're cutting a path, when you're not walking a path that somebody else carved, you never know if you're going to run into a rock. And
or if you're going to cut yourself with a machete.
And there's always the, it was the time and stuff. But like to be able to own it and evolve and move past it, though, is important because otherwise it stops you. And it's penance for what? And it does nothing to add some weight or leverage to the opposite side of those scales. So it takes a bit of courage to keep going in the face of that adversity and get back up when there's a blunder. But I think these are a lot of the things that RPG enthusiasts don't necessarily see or consider or understand when it comes to the work that they are either engaged in or reading or talking about with each other. What are some of the other like common misconceptions about game design and storytelling that you've encountered that you think that the layman just wouldn't be aware of to even look for?
Well, everybody, especially with especially with AI now, Harlan Ellison said everybody thinks they can write. And I know I was saying a little while ago, and I do believe it, that I love that everybody who wants to write or wants to create has the opportunity to do that. If you're going to do that, at least try to do it well. And there's a lot actually of skill and experience that goes into doing that. I got into an argument a few years ago with an online writers group that I was with because somebody had said, well, what does it take to be a writer, to actually be a writer? Do you have to be published? Do you have to have a writing degree? Do you have to, do you have to belong to this association or that association? And somebody else was like, no, you just have to think you're a writer. You're a writer if you think you are. I said, no, you have to do the work. You have to do the work. Yeah. And I got people, you're being ableist. You're being discriminatory. I'm like, no, if I said I'm a plumber, that doesn't automatically make me a plumber.
Right.
Writing
the proof is
work.
In the pudding.
Yeah.
Right.
Art is labor. Whatever the medium is, whether it's music, whether it's writing, whether it's game design, whether it's illustration, art is labor. It is skilled labor. And so whatever it is that you're going to do, learn how it's done. Talk to people, read books, look at the things that you think are done well and figure out why they're done well. Look at the things that are done badly and figure out why they're done badly. Hone the skill, get the chops. And a lot of times, the only way you can do that, and again, that's a great thing with Itch or Drive-Thru RPG, is you can make your mistakes, and it's not going to cost $10,000. It's not going to put the company out of business if you make a mistake. You can make the mistakes and learn. You learn by getting the feedback and going, okay, this person's just being a hater, but that person's right. Okay, I guess I'll make sure not to put page XX in my book. I'll have to. One of the things we were infamous for, because the books went through so fast, is we were infamous for missing text, drop text, because when you would rearrange things in PageMaker back in the old days, in PageMaker, if you rearrange something, a portion of the text might fall off the page. Now, with Adobe, with InDesign, you usually InDesign won't let you go forward if there's text missing. That technology did not exist in the 1990s. And
Right.
So if you shifted something around, yeah, exactly. It was all analog. So if you shifted something around, you'd miss text. So after Ascension's Right Hand had a few paragraphs of drop text, I'm like, God fucking damn it. I'm going to take the time to read through every paragraph to make sure that the words that are here meet the words that are here. And yes, that's going to take longer. And yes, I might have to stay here until 2 a.m. Yes, I might have to do this until, I'm tired and my wife's on the phone going, when are you coming home? I might have to go, I'm sorry, Ken, the book's going to be late to press. But you take the time to do it right. And that's an ongoing process that involves feedback. It involves swallowing your ego. Swallow your ego was one of the other things that I told my classes, my students, when I was at the Art Institute. I would show an excerpt from Attack of the Clones and an excerpt from 300. And it was the I hate sand romance scene, and it was the Spartan, come back with your shield or on it. And Zack Snyder done fucked up a few movies, but 300 is about as good as it could possibly be.
Oh, it's a great,
yeah. And I said, I showed the I hate sand scene, and I showed the Spartan come back, and I said, what's the difference between these two scenes? So because they're both completely artificial, they're both in really poetic, attempted flowery dialogue. People don't actually talk like either one of these things in real life. Both of them are acted out against a green screen. What's the difference? One of them is felt. One of them was rehearsed. The 300, Zack Snyder, whatever other problems he has, he would rehearse his actors. They do the script, and they would do the thing back and forth. George Lucas was so convinced that he was brilliant that he was just telling people what to say. They would get the sides, is what they're called. Just your character's lines. And you'd just be like, just say the line, and then they'd be like, George, what's going on here? I'm standing here on a fucking green screen. I'm just saying these words. What's going on? He says, just say the line. I said, George Lucas needed somebody to tell him, no, this is not working. George Lucas needed to swallow his ego. And so when you are working on whatever it is you're working on, you have to remember to swallow your ego, because ultimately what you're putting out there becomes part of other people's lives.
So, do you have any of those instances, like in particular, like a moment that you remember where you had to swallow your pride, and like did that lead to something? Like, was it disheartening but in the long run was better, or did it surprise you because it allowed you to like make more space for something else entirely? Like when was the first time you slapped yourself in the face and kind of changed your approach?
Well, the first time would probably be when I was in my drama class, and they were supposed to be decorating the sets for a production with graffiti, and I, again, in my autistic 14-year-old self, didn't realize that if I wrote profane graffiti, which to me was perfectly, that's the kind of graffiti people write. If you write profane graffiti on the flat of flats are scenery, pieces of scenery. If you write profane graffiti on the flat of a high school production, people are going to get mad at you and they're going to have to repaint the flat. I fucking learned
that. You were the kid that flipped off the camera during the group photo, huh?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a lot of those. At one point in one of the productions, our drama teacher was chewing out the lead off stage, and I went and chewed out the drama teacher, and she, in front of the person, because I mean I did the whole fucking white knight thing. I went right to her and I said, you're making her cry. That's not okay and stuff. And I was like 16 or something at that point. And the drama teacher said, you're right. Thank you. I didn't mean to be, goes to the person that she was chewing out. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be so harsh about stuff like that. Afterward, she literally took me by the arm. Teacher would never do this, now, but this is 1981. Yeah. Anyway, she takes me by the arm. She goes, I know why you did that. I know your intentions were good, but if you ever embarrass me like that or something like that, again, this thing, you are out. You are out of the class. You are out of theater. I will never speak to you again. You do not ever embarrass a director in front of the cast, ever, no matter who it is, no matter when it is, no matter what they've done or how right you think you are. Do not ever do that because I'm just I'm just yelling at you. Someone else might blacklist you from the industry.
Right.
She was strict, but she was right.
It sounds like it stuck with you though. Like
it totally stuck with me. When I was teaching at the Art Institute, I had there would inevitably come the time for midterms. And I was not a strict teacher, but it was an art college, and I told my students, you are going into a very competitive field. You cannot fuck around because you're competing for a job with 100 people who live and breathe this stuff. And inevitably we would get to the midterms and some people would fuck around. And I would give them the drill instructor thing. I told them the wall of shame. This goes back to White Wolf. Like I said, we could kind of be dicks sometimes. We were really dicks to each other. Too much so. But high pressure, young people. But we had the wall of shame. And the wall of shame was a place that sometimes it was illustrations, sometimes it was text. And they would just put it up there and mock it. And sometimes it was stuff that was sent in by people who wanted, who were submitting something. Sometimes it was something had been written by one of us. I thankfully never wound up on the wall of shame, but some of us did. I'm going to stick a pin in the wall of shame here because this actually goes back directly to what you said. When I found out that a piece of writing that I had done for the Street Fighter RPG was being used as an editing text because I'd fucked up so much stuff in it, I realized I needed to be better. I realized I needed to not. I got ahead of myself and just thought, I can do this. And then I found out that my coworkers were using this as a test to see whether people could notice how many mistakes there were in it.
They turned it into a litany test?
Yep. That'll get you to up your game when you realize shit like that. But we had the wall of shame. And if you wound up on the wall of shame, you got mocked. And I told my students,
it was a crucible.
It was a crucible. It was absolutely we called it cracking. We would haze each other all the time. And we called it cracking on each other. And part of whether or not you could hang at White Wolf was how well you could take cracking and crack back. That's unhealthy. That was, we call it a toxic work environment, but it was definitely part of who we were and what we did and how we did it back then, because everybody else was cracking on us. We'd crack on each other, but if anybody attacked any of us, which occasionally happened, sometimes physically, and we were like a rock group, and we were almost.
Wait. You got to tell me that story. What do you mean sometimes physically? Well,
Oh,
I got to know.
There were a few times like at conventions where somebody would, not a fan, but somebody would physically attack or assault. There was a point where two interns at White Wolf made a crass sexual remark about one of the employees, and word got around about that. Not only were they out the fucking door within 15 minutes of word getting around about that, but they had to be escorted out by the supervisor because most of us were ready to beat their asses, and we would have, because it happened. Not in-house, fortunately, but if somebody would like try and mug us at a convention, if somebody groped one of our female members or something like that, they would be dealing with all of us.
So you guys had almost like a tough family dynamic where you guys were hard on each other, but no one would dare be hard on any one of you. Like that was. So
we were.
It was like it's like having a sibling. Like no one gets gets to beat up my little brother but me.
Yeah,
like,
exactly that. Yeah, exactly that. And that was Oh, but going back to the Art Institute, I would tell them about the Wall of Shame, and I said, "You do not ever," and I like got up there and just you don't ever want to be on the Wall of Shame. I said, I'm not saying that every company has a physical Wall of Shame, but I said, but people talk. You don't ever want to be one of the people that people talk about. This is, of course, before social media. These days you don't, and this is one of those things that people are just
now. There's a literal wall of shame.
Now there's a literal wall of shame. If you fuck shit up, people will call your shit out. So you've got to make sure you don't fuck shit up. And I to a degree, I think that's a good thing. I like that if somebody says, "Oh, you have to sleep with me if you want to work on this book," that person gets outed. Fuck that person. I'm not going to get into names. There's no cheese down that tunnel, only rats. But I think it's good that a lot of the toxic behavior that was prevalent in the industry is no longer acceptable. It shouldn't be acceptable. It wasn't even acceptable back then. And that some of my conflicts with people back then was based on some of us calling other people out for stuff. But again, this is 25, 30 years ago. My point, though, going back to the Art Institute, is make sure that your shit is good. Make sure that your shit doesn't wind up on the wall of shame, whether it's your behavior or the work that you turn in, because that shit follows you. And even if it doesn't follow you, I didn't not get gigs because because my work was used as an editing test, but I felt embarrassed enough that they would think of using my work for an editing test that I made sure it was never that bad again.
It was like a professional slight, almost.
Yes, it was a professional slight, and it was a professional slight I deserved. So you make sure, like I said, going back to what I'd said to Ed, make sure they're not right.
Yeah. So then what about the inverse of that? Do you have any like trophy cases where some of your work, like I know you said Sorcerer's Crusade, but do you have any like favorite character or storyline from your creations that you're just you're really proud of and you kind of hold up as an exoneration of like, when I'm at my best, this is what I can do.
I think Sorcerer's Crusade is my gold standard for my work on Mage. That's the one where when I started working on Mage 20, I went back and read through all the Mage books, the ones that I did and the ones that were done after me, and to figure out, because by that point it had been, over 10 years since I'd walked away from Mage. So I was like, okay, what am I getting myself into? But Sorcerer's Crusade is the one where I was like, if I was to do this today, it'd be a little bigger because you can do that now. But there's not much I would change. I really love the way that came out. In terms of the one that was the most personal, and there's also the Fragile Path. I'm really fucking proud of the Fragile Path. That was one of those creative risks. I mean, Rashomon a la Mage, because Rashomon was the big influence on that one. Terrible thing happens. 5 different accounts of how and why it happened, and they don't agree with
Right.
each other because that's the way reality is. Um, but the most personal, it's definitely not my best book, but the most personal book to me is the Cult of Ecstasy Tradition book, first edition. Because
yeah, now we're talking.
that was the writer I'd originally hired to do that choked up a hairball on it and left me with nothing. And I had it was already late into development, and I had 2 weeks to get it into editing. So I wrote it in almost stream of consciousness in about 2 weeks. And
very Cult of Ecstasy.
yes, that's exactly it. Because I was not thinking about it, I just fucking channeled. I channeled not only what I was feeling, because Cassie is me. Cassie is me, and Arya was me too. Cassie was the me who at that time was so caught up in what people thought and how I was doing things, which I mean I had to be at that point, but was so caught up in fearing my limitations that I wasn't jumping off the cliff and flapping my arms until I flew. And Arya was this is what happens if you take that chance. And that whole exchange where Arya's like, if you want me to walk away, I'll walk away, but you will never see me again if I do. And Cassie's just like, okay, jump off the cliff and start flapping your arms. And that's exactly what my life was like. That's exactly how I've lived my life, especially after that, because something I realized after I wrote Cult of Ecstasy was I was mad at myself because that wasn't how I was living my life. So when I left White Wolf and my then wife and I broke up, that's how I lived my life. That's when the Satyr thing happened.
So
Satyr,
it really
Okay.
shook your identity.
Yeah, it shook my identity because as much that was truth, that was the purest truth funneled through fiction I had created at that point. I was writing about what I wanted to be and what I wasn't and what I could be. So
it was,
I
in some
did
ways,
it.
you could say it was like a veiled confessionary in a way.
Yeah. It was a veiled confession and an aspiration and a life point, because there's a veiled reference in there, which Echo also put into the artwork, to Burning Man. I had just been to Burning Man with my friend, actually Jennifer, the one who introduced us to Vampire.
Is that where the picture comes from? The famous spirally light picture of you with the light stick?
Oh yeah, well that's actually Fairy Worlds. My wife Sandy took that one at me at Fairy Worlds. Ironically, with that picture, that's a really good example right there, of the difference between the difference between reality and image, and how one can bleed through to the other. Sandy took that picture of me because I had dislocated my knee. And a few months earlier in a mosh pit, because of course I did for my 47th birthday, Sandy got us tickets to see Motorhead, and I dislocated my knee at Motorhead.
Heck yeah.
And months later at Fairy Worlds, my knee had healed badly and it was still dislocating, and I loved to dance, and I couldn't dance because my knee kept dislocating, and I was angry and frustrated and a fuck ton of pain. But I was sulking, and our friend Robbie had spinning poi, which I had learned how to spin fire from S.J. Tucker and Kevin Wiley. And you couldn't spin fire at Fairy Worlds for many reasons, but our friend Robbie had brought some spinning light poi, and Sandy asked Robbie for one of the poi and then gave it to me, and she's like, I know you can't dance, but you can spin. And then she took a picture of me doing it. That is one of the reasons why we've been together for 18 years, because she is awesome. And
that's an amazing trait to have in a partner. Like,
yes,
someone that can like recognize that you should be at your happiest, but there's something inside of you that's having you keep yourself down. Because I'm sure the knee sucked, but it wasn't to that level to where it ruined everything else, where she just kind of gave you another avenue that you didn't see. And like it really just shows how you can only get so far alone. And it actually brings me to the next question I wanted to ask you is, when you're not writing or designing, what games or books or hobbies do you enjoy? What do you and your wife like to do?
Well, we're doing a lot of video gaming these days.
I see you on Discord
Yeah.
all the time playing Baldur's Gate and Enchanted,
Mhm.
or what's the new one that just came out?
Enshrouded. She got me Enshrouded for my
Enshrouded.
birthday. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
so what we used to be really, really like social and physical until the combination of the injuries, and there's some grief stuff which I don't want to really get into. But I went through a really, really serious, heavy grieving period, and we drew back from people and drew back from a lot of things that we'd been doing. And then COVID hit and the lockdowns and all of that. Also, when my band broke up. But one of the ways I coped with the grieving process was playing a lot of Grand Theft Auto and just killing the fuck out of pixels. And when COVID, when the COVID lockdowns hit, we just got really, really into gaming with our friends on Discord. And Sandy got involved with some of the streaming communities, especially Spange and Laney, and she got involved with them. And most of our social interaction these days is on Discord, either gaming with each other or gaming with ourselves, playing a lot of Moria, Return to Moria with each other and with our friends. I listen to music like all the time. I mean, anybody who knows anything about me or my work knows what a just fanatic about music I am. Power Chords, Music, Magic, for Urban Fantasy came out of marrying the role playing thing and the magic thing and the music thing. That was a passion project of mine. But anyway, and I read a lot. I mean, this is a few of the like 5 books I'm alternating between reading right now. I don't know if I'm diagnosably ADHD, but I'm always switching between things that I'm doing or things that I'm reading, because if I do any one of them too much, then I just kind of shut down. So I do that. Sandy, as I said, plays a lot of video games, and we have 4 cats who we adore, and we spend a lot of time on them, and we spend a lot of time with each other. And I spend a lot of time coming up with the next thing that I'm going to be doing, which is only like 10 or 12 things on my production to-do list.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, so there's always the march going forward, and you can never go back and change how things originally come out. Obviously, you can revise. There's a whole era, World of Darkness, based around that. But if you could go back and revisit like any piece of your past works, which one would it be and why?
Well, I would redo most of the first 3 years or so of Mage. Obviously I would, obviously the Akashic Brotherhood book. It's, there's a certain point when Mage's 30th anniversary and Deliria's 20th anniversary came up this past summer, and I was considering at that point whether or not to try and do a new edition, or had been considering earlier to try and do a new edition of Deliria, or how I was going to celebrate the 30th anniversary with Mage. And Sandy is saying, why, you revisited Mage. I'm really, for the, almost entirely happy with the 20th anniversary, the whole line. The only one of the books that I would have liked to have done better is Gods and Monsters, simply because when Gods and Monsters hit my desk to work on,
I love Gods and Monsters.
Thank you.
Love Gods and Monsters. Yeah. That's I probably referenced that. That's got to be one of my favorite books to reference when creating a boss for any splat, really.
Thank you.
It's such a good edition book for really anything. And it does a lot of good job of like capturing these little gems, because a lot of things in Gods and Monsters aren't new concepts. So there's concepts
Yeah.
that largely got looked over. Like you can find
Mhm.
almost the exact same thing in some cases, and it just does a really good job of collecting them all into a very comprehensive, easy to reference like source for a lot of these like larger than life
Mhm.
sort of instances that you bring into the game. So I'm super surprised to hear you say that, because I'd have to say that's one of my favorite 20th edition pieces that's come out.
Thank you. And well, there's a perfect example of the difference between internal perception of a thing and the external perception of a thing. Because yeah, when I see gods and monsters, um, that's my alarm. Because I have a
I got you.
hard out in half an hour. So
Yeah, I
that was
got you. I
just
got a
my
timer going on the side.
well.
We'll
Thank
make
you.
it. We'll be on time. I promise you.
But it was with gods and monsters. Again, goes back to the grief thing, but my girlfriend had just died of cancer, and one of my closest friends had died of a heart attack, and they both died the same week. And so basically I was a wreck working on that book, and for me everything about that book is that period. um, I had a really good crew on it. We were able, because thank you social media, we were able to actually get people from the cultures involved, instead of just getting another bunch of white folks to write the stuff. So Hira Mikota wrote the material wrote the Asian material. um, James Sombrano wrote the Indigenous American material. um, God, why am I blanking on her name? Isabella Price, wrote the section on the Loa and the African deities. um, and we got all the pieces together, and all that stuff happened, and so it's not as polished as I would have liked. And because I was not finished with the rules section, there was some stuff like there's the reference to size, which I had meant to write, but I never actually wrote it. And there was people have asked about gnosis. Well, what about gnosis for spirit characters? I was going to write a thing about that, but when it got to the point of writing that, I was just like, I can't wrap my head around this right now, so I'm just going to say you can't do it. And I've gotten dinged on it ever since. And I mean, that's a justified ding. And the size thing bugs me, simply because, while it's not dropped text, it's something that's referenced that's not there. And I'm usually much too meticulous to let something like that go into print, and I missed that. And so I kick
It's kind
myself
of
for it.
it's unrealized if you look at it in self-contained, but if you've been a fan of
Yeah.
the series for a while, it's an easy reference to make. It's go look at Gnosis, it's how it works, and
Yeah.
like it works. But I get what you're saying as far as like a standalone piece, like with a barcode on it. It can
Mhm.
feel a bit like unrealized. And
Yeah.
yeah, but
I
I honestly think that it's done far more good than detriment as far as 20th edition entries go. Like I said, one of my favorite books to crack open and reference. So then, what about? Do you have any upcoming projects or ideas you're particularly excited about that you can share
Oh
with
yeah.
us?
The sharing part is going to be difficult, just because there are a few of them that I cannot talk about
Sure.
publicly. Let's just say there's going to be something that's going to make, and I know you and I talked about it before, that's going to make a bunch of people excited when it shows up. I'm looking forward to
Oh
being
yeah.
able to be public about that. Um, I am currently working on 3 novels, um, actually 4, but 3 of them are kind of in pieces on my workbench. The other one is, well, I've written a bunch of stuff. I'll get back to it when I have an opportunity. One is the sequel to Red Shoes, Black Swan Blues, which you and I had talked about before we started, and I'm really looking forward to getting back on that one again. Um, One is called Crossways, which is a novelization of a screenplay that I wrote a few years ago. We weren't able to produce the film because it was going to be too expensive, so I'm writing it as a novel. And the other one is called Not the Final Girl, which is a novel about the victim of a serial killer who haunts him. And that one's fun. I'm enjoying the fuck out of writing that one. um, So I talk about and post excerpts from a lot of this stuff on my Patreon. So folks can go look up my Patreon and you find out a whole bunch of stuff that I'm
I
working on.
Yep. Actually, in the announcements channel, I just posted a little blurb to all of your links and socials, including your Patreon, your stuff on Drive Through RPG, the Storytellers Vault, your TikTok, your blog. I just plugged that in and added everyone for it. So hopefully we can get a lot more eyes on your a lot of these works out there. Because at the end of the day, we love to see you keep going, and we want to see 30 more years, honestly.
Thank you. And yeah, there's a big thing that I'm working on that I just can't talk about. And I'm also working, I don't know if I can talk about this or not. I'm working on a freelance project, a big old freelance project for another publisher. It's not World of Darkness. It's a 5e thing. I don't know whether I can talk about that one or not, so I won't. Okay. But I'm almost finished with that. I collaborated with my friend Joey Coyote Wallace, and holy fuck, y'all! Dispatches from Appalachia by Joey Coyote Wallace. Go look that shit up because he is fucking amazing. Joey's the protege that I mentioned earlier. He is one of the most talented writers I've ever known. He is refining his craft, but he's refining it well, and the dude writes with fire. He is fucking amazing. So I highly recommend that people go check out Dispatches from Appalachia. That's a blog. That's his blog. And I'm also in all of this other stuff. I'm also working on my second collection of short fiction, which is called A Scorpion's Prayer, and I'm hoping to put that one out this year. So yeah, that I always people ask me, what are you working on? I'm always working on a whole bunch of things. I'm like fucking Shiva, with juggling projects around. Partly because I've got that whole ADHD thing where I've got to be working on a bunch of different things. Partly because I've got too many ideas, more ideas than I will ever be able to actually produce in this life. And partly because that's the only way you can survive as a professional artist, much less a professional writer, is to not be working on one thing. It's to be working on as many things as you can work on, because there's not a lot of money in this. So you got to work on as much shit as you can.
Right. You got small fish. So that means you need a lot of rods in the water.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep. So yeah, any other questions? Oh, is that good?
Well, I do know that you got to get going pretty quick. So I was actually hoping I had a couple community questions that I wanted to ask you, and maybe get your take on some of them. All right. So first one is, if you could freely rework the factions of Mage today without having to be beholden to Paradox or lock them into the past setup, how would you shake them up? What would you change, and what would you keep the same?
I'd redo almost all of them. In fact, I wanted to do that for Mage 20, but they wouldn't let me. But yeah, I would, as much as possible, I would get people from the right cultures to work on the groups, like we did in the Disparate Crafts book, which has not come out yet, but that's in somewhere in the production pipeline. But yeah, the closest really example of what I would do is in Mage Made Easy. Where I would,
another great book. I picked that one up recently. Yeah,
but I would refocus the game on what kind of a mage you are, rather than what group of mages you belong to. I would put the things like the traditions and so forth. I would put them as sort of these weird, mysterious cults that you might hear about in the background, but I would center it on what kind of a mage are you, and how do you approach magic? Why are you magic? How are you magic? Rather than what group versus which group. I really did this
more personal.
Yeah,
more personal than political.
Yes. I would focus even more intently on the whole War for Reality thing, but I would not make it about technology versus magic, because technology is magic. And magic is a technology. We explore that a lot in Mage 20, where I said, okay, the Ascension War is still going, but it's not really the traditions versus the technocracy. In fact, if you follow the metaplot breadcrumbs that I put out but didn't enforce as this is what is happening, you've got the technocracy and traditions teaming up with each other because they realize that they're both corrupt. That to me.
Is that, so would that be like could that be seen as almost a reemergence of the Order of Reason?
Kinda. One of the big problems, and this is a big theme in Mage in general, one of the big problems with power, no matter whose power it is that power innately is corrupting. And so you have to, as a mage, no matter which group you belong to, you have to be careful what you do with it. The Order of Reason had a lot of good ideas. The Nine Traditions had a lot of good ideas. Even the technocracy had a few of the right ideas. All of them went about those ideas the wrong way. They all became oppressive. They all became corrupt. Whether or not they were infiltrated by the group that literally worships and embodies corruption is up to the individual storyteller. But the idea of imposing your reality on somebody else, no matter if you think your reality is about control or if it's about, worshiping the trees in the woods, if you are imposing your world on somebody else, that's fucked. And if you're willing to, blow up gas mains and, count human lives as collateral, then you really need to look at why. You need to look at who you think you are and who you have become. That's always been a theme in Mage, because, another difference in the way that I approached Mage from the way a lot of the original the original idea. The original idea was created by someone who was, while a very, very good person, was an upper class. He's an upper class white guy. I grew up middle class white guy, but I'd lived in a lot of shitty neighborhoods, and I had done, by the time I joined White Wolf, I had been shit on enough and had lived around people who were being shit on enough to have a much angrier approach to the idea of imposing a reality on somebody else and having somebody else's reality imposed on you. That's something I've only grown angrier about as I've gotten older. And the idea of a reality war is even more true in the world in real life now than it was in the 90s. So I would keep that idea of reality war, but I would focus it more intently on resisting the idea, resisting the world that is being imposed on us by people who are and whose agendas are innately corrupt, and going, how do we make a better world when we can? Because one of the things that there may have been a looming apocalypse over the 1990s, but that was a theoretical idea. There is several very real apocalypses staring us in the face right now, and if we're going as a species going to survive this shit, we need to change how we're dealing with it. That's, if I was doing a Mage, and people have asked whether I'm doing Mage 5th edition. Probably not. I'm never going to say never at this point after the last 30 years, but I doubt it. But if I was given a complete carte blanche on you get complete creative freedom on Mage as you would do it, I would make it about now remaking the world, saving the world from the very real dangers it's in, working together to make a better world than we have, because that's the challenge we're facing now. And
so would you say that you're taking more of a hero's perspective than a monster? Because World of Darkness, you're playing a monster, but you're playing a misunderstood monster. Yeah. So would some of that, you think you'd change almost the perspective of it, where the monster is out there as opposed to right here?
Oh, the monster is as close as your mirror. It's about having the potential to be a monster and choosing not to.
So then, if you were forced to pick a craft to join the traditional council as a full member, which one would you pick and why?
Of the disparate crafts?
Yeah, of your like your traditional course.
Well, are you asking about the traditions, or are you asking about the crafts? Which craft would I pick to join the traditions?
The community question as written is: if you were
Okay.
forced to pick a craft to join
Okay.
the traditions council as a full member, which one did you pick and why?
Oh, the Bata'a.
Yeah,
Yeah, the Bata'a. Because the
why?
Bata, well, because the Bata'a are literally, the group was literally created by people who were enslaved and oppressed and taken from their homes, and whose world was they built their magic, they built their beliefs, they built their group out of resistance. And the Bata'a, unlike the dream speakers, would just be like, no, sit the fuck down, shut the fuck up. We're talking here. They are the largest of the groups. I think possibly when you look at the real beliefs, so the real beliefs associated with the word voodoo, which is a slippery word in general and has a lot of baggage. But when you look at the number of real life practitioners and real life believers, they are very possibly the biggest group in the world. And they're the one that lots of people just plain discount. And they're the ones who I think more than anything else would have had the experience and the numbers and the insight and the power to go, no, you sit the fuck down, shut the fuck up. We're changing how we're doing things because y'all have had 500 years to do it and you have fucked it up for 500 years and we need something better.
So it always comes back to flipping tables, huh?
It would get back to flipping tables. And I wouldn't write that because I'm too fucking white to do it right. I would get somebody. Yeah. I would get black authors to write it because I know that I know that I don't have the right to be that person, to say that. I would hire the people who did, which is one of the big things that I wish we could have done back in the 90s. We did hire non-white writers and we had a lot of non-white people in the staff and on the in the freelance corps, but the majority of the stuff was written from a white suburban American standpoint because that's the people we had to write it and draw it. We can do better than that now, and we should be. And whenever possible in Mage 20, we did. And if I was constructing, a new Mage for this era, I would get a whole lot more. And I'd fucking pay them what they were worth. Which none of these publishers are doing.
Yeah. It's hard to like that we don't have enough time to get into that.
We don't have enough time to get into that.
But we'll have to schedule another thing for that one. I do have a couple more community questions. If we can get them out in time. I know you got a hard cutoff.
Yep.
All right. So I want, if you had to describe your personal path to ascension, how would you?
Oh, Cult of Ecstasy. I'm a cultist of ecstasy. I don't use drugs much, but I don't really use them at all anymore. But I have sensation, adrenaline, dancing. Dancing was my big thing. But I am, in terms of the way, like we were talking about earlier with the Cult of Ecstasy tradition book. I mean, I am Cassie and I'm Arya. I'm a cultist of ecstasy. Actually, I go into how the Cult of Ecstasy and AKA the Sahaya are changing. Go into that in the Lore of the Traditions entry that I wrote for that group.
Oh, I love the Cult of Ecstasy, so I think that's a good answer.
Thank you.
It's awesome. Yeah. All right. Okay. So this is a loaded one. Which artist do you like working with the best? Which do you think capture the magic of Mage the best? Now I know there's a lot of good choices. You got Larry McDougall, Dan Smith, Josh Timbrook, John Cobb, Alex Sheikman. There's so many talented artists. Mm-hmm. But if you could pluck one, even out of your 30-year career from any point, and put together a dream team for projects going forward, who would you choose?
Okay, well, it wouldn't. Yeah, I was going to say it wouldn't be just one. It would be Mark Jackson, Echo Chernick, Steve Prescott, and the name just went, and Alex Sheikman. Those were the people who, not only who I worked with best, And I go, Mark and Echo and I have been friends now for decades in real life, away from our artistic collaborations. And I've worked with Mark and Echo on collaborations in other projects as well. But Mark and Echo, which for people who don't know it, Echo Chernick was known as H.J. McKinney back in the 90s. Mark and Echo, when I saw their work, I'm just like, that's it. They get it. You know, that there's a quality to their work that they get it. And whatever I could describe, they could put it in and it would come out the other side looking even better. And so I love working with them. They're dear friends of mine. We're great collaborators together. There'd be Brian Syme, who I haven't worked with on Mage, but he and I've been collaborating on shit for 20 something, almost 20 years now. I always tried to get him on Mage, but Paradox wouldn't approve it.
Yeah.
And Alex and I have not met in person, but I always love the stuff that he did with Mage, and we've chatted a lot online. And Steve Prescott, holy fucking shit! The stuff. Talk about the crafts. The images he did for the crafts in the 2-page spreads in Mage 20 fucking blew me away. He took really detailed art notes and spun them in this new way that I'm just like, of all the art that's in the 20th anniversary edition, Steve's pictures for the crafts are my favorites. So it would be them.
Okay. I think we got time for one more question. Okay. So, having roots in werewolf, but so much time in mage. Of werewolves and mages, who has a better understanding of the Umbra and a better mastery of it?
That depends on who you ask.
Yeah, I'm asking you.
My feeling is, and Bill and I spent a lot of time talking about this shit back in the day. The werewolves have the intuitive understanding. The mages have the intellectual understanding. To the werewolves, it's deeply sensory and elemental, so they can only perceive that part. The mages are so focused on the intellectual pursuit of magic that they have a wider spectrum that they can perceive, but they only have a limited understanding of the middle and the low umbra, because except for the Ethanatos, because they have a little bit more, experience with the low, with the realms of death than most mages do. But the mages are largely stuck in that high umbra realm of concepts and theories, and rarely get their feet muddy and their claws in the dirt the way the werewolves just do intuitively by virtue of who they are. For all of werewolves' innate problematic elements, I still love werewolf best of the lot of them, because going back, this is a great place to dovetail, but going back to what I was saying, when I was a kid, out in the woods at 3:00 in the morning, barefoot, no glasses. Yeah, just like doing this because the raw sensation felt intoxicating. That, for all the time that I spend behind a screen with a camera and a keyboard and all of that stuff, and all that I can't really physically do a lot of the shit that I used to do, that's where my heart is. That's where my soul is. It's in the woods. It's in the mud. And so I get werewolf. Mage is my baby. Mage is my love, my dancing partner of 30 years. Werewolf still feels like my soul. So it's a little of both. And the Umbra's got room for all of them. And so does the World of Darkness.
Well, I think that's an amazing place to, like you said, toast. Satyr, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
You're an amazing artist, and you've brought a lot of quality content for a lot of gamers at every different age and generation and wave that they've come through on this crazy adventure with. I look forward to seeing what comes out next, and I really look forward to having another chat with you if you would have us again.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love
So
to. Thank you. Thank you. You are awesome. I've just thoroughly enjoyed talking to you for 3 hours or something that we've been going. You're a great
yeah,
person. Thank you for remember what I was saying earlier about that magic place where the artist expresses and the audience responds. There's that magic place in there. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for bringing that magic. Because
oh, thank you very much.
that means everything to me. I really appreciate it. And let's do this again. This is fun. Thank you to everybody else who's been here. Um, thank you, Badger, for setting this up and keeping all the keeping the technocracy fed. And thank all of you, because you know one of the things I made a real point of in Mage 20 is no matter who owns the intellectual property of the World of Darkness, Mage belongs to Mage fans.
John, absolutely.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, Satyr.
Thank you.
Until next time, my friend.
All right, take care, my friend. Have a good one. Stay safe, and I will see you all and talk to you all later. Take care. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
On that, I'm going to leave the stage. Night.
All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for showing up. I had a lot of fun, and I look forward to whatever comes next. See you later, guys.